The golden era never has been the present. There is a long tradition of television and films looking back with nostalgia at happier days. But the Happy Days effect is over. Here's why a show like Happy Days could never happen again. In the 1970s, everyone in the family, from little kids like me to older grandparents, watched the sitcom Happy Days, a show televised in the 1970s about the 1950s, a time period that happened a mere 20 years earlier. The clothes, the hairstyles, and the music were unmistakably 1950s. I was just a little kid in the 70s who was not even alive in the 1950s, yet even I knew that Happy Days screamed 1950s. The contrast between the 50s and the 70s was stark. Clearly, in the 20 years that passed between the 50s and the 70s, everything had changed. Can you even imagine a current television show that takes place 20 years prior, circa 2005, trying to claim nostalgia? How would you even be able to discern that the show takes place around 2005? While fashion, hairstyles, and music are always evolving, it seems that the rapid change from decade to decade in the 20th century has slowed down to a snail's pace in the 21st century. 20 years used to make a huge difference. Look at the difference between the 1950s and the 1970s, or the 1940s and the 1960s, or the 1960s and the 1980s. But the difference between the 2000s and the 2020s is much more subtle. Sure, the names of the musicians may have changed a bit, but the genres of music are largely the same. New and influential genres of music defined each decade until the 1990s. 1950s introduced rock and roll. 1960s introduced Motown and psychedelic rock. 1970s introduced punk rock and disco. 1980s introduced new wave. 1990s introduced grunge and brought back ska. What defines the 2000s? The 2010s? The 2020s? I dare you to take a song from 2005 and get an older adult to identify the decade it came from. Nowadays, it's not uncommon to eat in a restaurant and hear music playing from 50 years ago. While eating your burger or salad, you might hear 1970s classics from ABBA, the Eagles, Dolly Parton, or Led Zeppelin. But when I was a kid in the actual 1970s, you would never hear music from 50 years prior. I mean, I'm not even sure I could name any song from the 1920s. Certainly, technology plays a role. Kids nowadays have easy access to music from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. As a 1970s kid, I had virtually no access to music from the 1910s, 1920s, and 1930s. In recent years, algorithms individualize what content we each consume, so much so that my 2020s has been a very different experience than your 2020s. So much so that recent decades are no longer shared experiences. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still possible to create new content about the 1940s or the 1980s, anything up to the 1990s. The show Mad Men showcased the 1960s. The show Stranger Things showcases the 1980s. The show Young Sheldon showcased the late 80s and early 90s. Unlike 1986 film Stand By Me, which gave off a 1950s vibe merely from the surroundings the characters found themselves in. Current content that wants to point out that it takes place a couple decades prior must give you an explicit reference to a political figure, popular culture, or technology of the time. The ambiance alone would no longer suffice to make the decade stand out. The Happy Days effect is over. Now I want to hear from you. What decade do you look back with nostalgia for? What films or shows do you think have the Happy Days effect? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, then you will love these videos. Click on one now.